Good evening, everyone. I think I am now on the screen at the moment. Good evening, everyone from Hong Kong. And for those of you who are not in Hong Kong from other parts of the world, good morning and good afternoon. I am Meng Yin Ho. I'm the program manager from FNF Global Innovation Hub here in Hong Kong. Welcome to our webinar today. Our webinar's topic today is China's new digital currency. I think this is going to be a very interesting topic, as recently China has just started its own test for the digital renminbi. But nothing concrete has been revealed. Some experts even speculated that this year China is going to launch it officially, but some experts said no, it could be later than expected. So what does that mean to the world when China, let's say, finally launched this currency? And what is exactly this digital currency? To answer this, we are very honored today to have two experts in this topic to help give us some insights on this topic. Our first panelist is Mr. Andrew Work. Andrew is the editor-in-chief of Harbour Times, a publication focused on Hong Kong politics and policies. He is also the co-founder of Lion Rock Institute, which is the first independent free market think tank in Hong Kong. Recently, Andrew has also worked with Next Change Group, a digital merchant bank that focuses on blockchain investment and cryptocurrency finance. Our second panelist is Mr. Pindar Wong. Pindar is the chairman of VeriFi Hong Kong Limited, an internet financial infrastructure consultancy. Pindar is an internet pioneer who co-founded the first licensed internet service provider in Hong Kong in 1993. Recently, he advocates himself in blockchain technology and co-founded the global blockchain research network called Be Safe, and also Belt and Road Blockchain Consortium. Thank you for joining us today. But last but not least, we also have our colleague Anna Marti. She will be the moderator for the discussion. She is the manager of our FNF Global Innovation and Digitalisation based in Germany. Before we start our webinar, let me go through the rundown with you very quickly. Andrew and Pindar is going to have a short presentation first, followed by a moderated panel discussion, plus a Q&A session at the end. So if you guys have questions, you can simply type in your questions in the Q&A button on the anytime, and the panelists will answer your questions later in the section. To make it more interactive in this webinar, we are trying a new function or a new way to do it. So if you would like to speak up or leave your comments or raise your questions directly to the panelists, you can click the raise hand button, and you can and then type your question or comments on chat to notify our panelists, and then our moderator will arrange you to the panelists and allow you to speak and then share your views to the panelists. Okay, I think I've talked enough, so I will pass the mic to Andrew to start the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ming-Yin, and I'm really excited to be on here. And I just wanted to say thanks to you guys, because the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, of course, I've got a bit of history with these guys, because as you mentioned, I was a founder of a free market think tank a long time ago, and one that is very much aligned with the values of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And so I've always been really happy to work with them whenever possible. So thanks for having me on, and let's get right into it. So. We're talking about something that for a long time people said they wanted to talk about. China is going to have its own cryptocurrency. China is going to be doing this, and people didn't really know what that meant. I'm sure a lot of people on the call, they've heard of cryptocurrencies, they're aware of them. They've gone a little bit quiet of late. I'm sure a lot of people noticed when Bitcoin had its big run up in value, and people were really interested, and it kind of hit its heyday a couple of years ago, and governments were really, watching these strange things called cryptocurrencies. And it seemed like a lot of people were out to make some fast money from it, and governments were watching them. In some cases, they tried to ban them. They were regulating how they were released, how people were using them. And over time, there's been a little bit of a regulatory framework about how the broader world of cryptocurrencies has been used. During that time, governments started looking at it and thinking, what can I do with these? What does this new blockchain technology make available for us? And we started hearing about governments thinking about how they were going to use it. And some names we heard about more than others. Sweden was, maybe they heard Sweden was looking into creating its own digital currency or a cryptocurrency. Venezuela, had crazy ideas about what they were going to do and back it with oil. It was Venezuela. That wasn't going to happen. There was nothing credible there. Estonia was highly rumored to have one, and then that kind of evaporated. But people were really testing out ideas. They didn't really know what they were doing or where it was going to go, because blockchain was a new technology and the whole concept was very different. In addition to creating currencies, people were also talking about how could they use it in finance? How could they use blockchain to move normal money from place to place, to do it faster, more efficiently? And there was a lot of talk of one of the big, more famous cryptocurrencies, Ripple, perhaps even being able to make redundant SWIFT in a big part of the financial system. And that was a big part of the debate for a while. Major corporations, big banks, and sometimes governments started joining consortiums like the R3 consortium, where you had the Bank of Canada and the Bank of Singapore and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan kind of coming in and then later coming out of these consortiums as they thought it may or may not work for them. But while all this was going on, China was leading the way. For most other people, it really seemed like they didn't really know what they were doing, but China was doing a lot of really serious research and they made a big commitment to staying ahead on blockchain technologies and thinking about how they could use new technologies. Now, as this evolved over time, kind of little rumors would leak out about, the China cryptocurrency is coming. China's going to have a cryptocurrency. But at the same time, China was banning the use of other cryptocurrencies and saying it did want to use blockchain. Over time, and as we've gotten a better sense of what China wants to do, what has become clear is that China is introducing something that is not a cryptocurrency. And I'm going to get into some of the reasons of why that is. And so people in the know have stopped calling it, the People's Bank of China, because that is the central bank of China. They've stopped calling it the forthcoming PBOC cryptocurrency. And now mostly you'll see it referred to as the People's Bank of China's central bank digital currency. And we'll talk about, I'll talk a little bit about what those are and what that means. And now, and even the latest documentation that we're getting out of the People's Bank of China, they're even taking it one step back even further, and they're calling it a DC/EP, right? Digital currency / electronic payment, right? And it has really come a long way. And I mean that in comparison to other nations where people are just kind of talking about it. I'm not going to touch too much on Facebook Libra. I think Pindar might talk about that a little bit more. But a lot of national governments, when they saw what was happening on that front, they kind of said, we really need to accelerate our plans for a digital currency. They're not really looking like they're going anywhere fast. But China, on the other hand, has test runs happening right now. And so I'm just going to pop up a little bit here, just introduce a couple of things with regards to this PBOC. And you can see I've got it there, the CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. Bottom right-hand corner, you can see the also known as digital currency electronic payment. The first wave of testing is underway in China right now. They are working on this. There are 4 major cities. Depending on how well you know Asia, Shenzhen is it was the first part of China to open up. It's also the home of many of the big technology companies in China. Chengdu, another huge city within China. Suzhou is also one of the test bases. And they've been testing it out, for example, on a very small basis there, where a small group of civil servants have been getting half of their transportation salary in the form of this digital payment. They get the digital currency, and then there's a means for them to turn it into normal money right away. So it's really early testing days. The fourth place where they are testing this is Xiong'an, which is kind of a new technology city outside of Beijing. And while these tests are underway, the one that is forthcoming, there's been more recent announcements that they're actually going to start testing it out with companies in the private sector. Some of them are small Chinese companies you might not be familiar with, but some of the names being floated include McDonald's, Starbucks, and Subway. Now, before you get too excited, that doesn't mean that McDonald's, headquarters, or like McDonald's the corporation, is adopting this on a trial basis, but rather local franchisees of these are trying out, are supposed to be part of the next wave of people that are going to be trying this out. So what are we talking about here if it is not a cryptocurrency? And what makes this not a cryptocurrency? So cryptocurrencies come in a wide range of formats. Most people that aren't familiar with the sector have heard of Bitcoin. They've picked up on it from finance talk. And that is kind of the granddaddy. That is the be all and end all. And there are some people that believe Bitcoin can do everything. The Bitcoin, we call them the maximalists. However, there's a wide range of other types of cryptocurrencies, like Ethereum. And if you've ever heard people talk about smart contracts, Ethereum was kind of the starting point for designing smart contracts. But there's others called like stable coins, which will have some relevance here. Stable coins, which are linked to another currency, much like the Hong Kong dollar is linked to the US dollar. We're not going to have time to get into all of these, but utility tokens, security tokens, digital asset, non-fungible coins. There's all different types, but they're all cryptocurrencies. This is not. Why? A cryptocurrency, as it is perceived, and one of the great benefits of it is that it's decentralized. The production, the holding, and the account keeping of it is decentralized. It's not produced in any one place. It's not kept in any one place. The holding and tracking of it is everywhere, roughly speaking. It's a little, I'm painting in very broad brushes here, but it's so we can get to the rest of this. This digital currency will be highly centralized and controlled by the People's Bank of China. They are going to have a very, very tight rein on this. Typically, a cryptocurrency is something that's perceived as being very open for people in the know who know how to use it and work with it. They can see what's happening with a cryptocurrency, the movement of it, even though they can provide a high degree of anonymity. This thing that we're talking about today being introduced by the PBOC, it will be visible to the PBOC, but they are claiming that they will protect the privacy of the user. So people will generally not be able to see it except the People's Bank of China, for whom it will be very visible. We'll get more into that. If you have your cryptocurrency, typically it is very easy to protect. The control of it rests with you as the owner. We say the key holder, someone who owns a key to holding it. With this digital currency, the People's Bank of China has the ultimate control and visibility over all the currency that will be produced, as best we can tell at this point. With cryptocurrencies, there's normally a wide range of companies and technologies and ways that you can hold your currency. Here, the PBOC is most certainly going to have its own manner of control, and you will have a limited choice of ways to hold it and channels through which you can move it. So I think, once we kind of look at that comparison, you start to understand why we don't call it a cryptocurrency. A couple of other points you can see on the slide in front of you. We expect it'll go through Chinese banks. So it'll go from the People's Bank of China out to the Chinese banks, and also through the payment gateways of Alipay, which is part of Alibaba, and WeChat Pay, which is part of WeChat, a company called Tencent. And for many people outside of China, you may have heard that the urban areas of China have become the most, the proliferation of digital payment is the highest in the world. I think Sweden is supposed to be right up there with a comparable level. But when tourists, my wife has been going to China for years and years and years now, and the last year or so before the whole COVID thing hit, she went up there and was reduced to asking strangers to pay for her while she tried to get them to take her paper renminbi, because in China, so many places now, they just don't take actual cash. You have to make a digital payment. This is not this digital currency yet, but the mechanisms are in place through Alipay, WeChat Pay, to introduce a currency like this. So we're looking at this. So you may ask, wait a second, if this was all supposed to be about cryptocurrencies and the benefit of cryptocurrencies, why are they introducing something that is clearly not a cryptocurrency? It's almost the anti-cryptocurrency in some ways. This is quite interesting. There's a wide range of motives that are attributed to why you would introduce a digital currency that the central bank could control and see all the time. There are domestic motivations for doing this, and there are international ones. So, but the primary reason, and the more and more we learn about this, is that it is about visibility and it is about control. That is the principal reason behind implementation of this digital currency. So, you imagine a currency the central bank can see all the time. And when I say all of time, that means now and all the history. They can take the currency, they can tag it, they can follow it or destroy it at whim. And that central bank is not an independent institution. Apart from the government, the central bank is an apparatus of the government that is, connected to the police, the military, prosecutors, jailers, and economic planners. Those all work in tandem. So, domestic objectives. Some of them are on the face benign, and they are the same reasons that financial regulators around the world want to be able to see where money goes. And of course, that is things like anti-money laundering, fighting terrorism, fraud, right? So these are kind of benign or things that people put out there as good reasons to have more visibility into the currency. You have other things that this makes possible, which is a higher degree of control of the money supply, and also cross-border currency controls. And I mean, those are things that economists can sit down and have a discussion about whether those are good things or bad things, or how they're executed. And it includes monitoring of everybody that uses money. And now you combine this with artificial intelligence, electronic ID recording, and police objectives. It could become the ultimate means to freeze or destroy anybody's life savings or stop them from participating in the economy. And it can do that in a blunt way, or it can do it in a very surgical way. So these are some of the domestic objectives. There are international objectives we talk about a lot in the paper, but we think that achieving those international objectives may be a little more difficult. And I think this is where I want to turn over to Pindar Wong, who coined a great phrase that we talked about in the paper, and is a really, really interesting idea that he's going to talk to you about now. So Pindar, over to you.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you. Can you hear me? Is this okay? I just want to make sure. First of all, thank you very much for the introduction, Andrew, and actually for your very interesting work, which I've read several times. Also, thanks to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom for having me this evening. Just to be clear, before I begin, there's this kind of a disclaimer. Tonight I'm just sharing an opinion. None of this is kind of financial advice of any form. So with that sort of disclaimer out the way, I'm surprised one of my statements made it into your paper, which was talking about M16, or the weaponization of, in some sense, money. I mean, normally we talk about sort of the money supply in terms of coins and cash, M0 in terms of narrow money, and then we move out to M1, M2, even M4 in terms of broad money. But I wanted to get to this notion of how the financial networks that are in place, the existing ones and perhaps also future ones, actually need to be treated with great care. Why? Why? Because many of these networks currently you might have access to. The access could be implied, but if you're shut off from them, as Andrew has alluded to, that could be quite devastating. Now, the more specific, I mean, M16, as everyone knows, is a very famous US weapon. And right now, there are a lot of discussions about the use of financial sanctions, obviously given Hong Kong's situation. The specific act is called IPA, which is actually from 1977, called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. I think, Andrew, you mentioned Venezuela earlier on, and I think Trump used this ability to freeze Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA, as being an example of using, in some sense, these kinds of financial tools and financial weapons. Now, the reason why I actually want to expand upon this notion of M16 and financial weaponization is because, in a sense, I think, I guess this evening I'm trying to be a devil's advocate to the paper, is that it kind of misses on some of the financial innovations that some of us are exploring, for example, along the Belt and Road. As you know, M16 is a weapon, but it's also a machine. And, you know, I think there's a great deal to be had that any new financial architecture, where we're talking about CBDCs or cryptocurrencies, needs to look at the new kinds of economic participants. So when we're looking at the Internet of Things with 50 billion different devices, and we talk about the machine-to-machine economy, in other words, how do we lend money to a machine? How do we lend money to a financial network? Which one of those networks have and can generate the largest financial return? It may be missing the sort of the bigger picture by sort of focusing on traditional notions of money for humans, money for companies. Why? Because the new economy will also have sort of economic participants that are not neither. So machines, algorithms, even robots themselves. So any kind of new financial architecture here needs to be sort of future-proof. So one thing I think is not really being appreciated much is that anything that I think is being well engineered will actually have to take that into account. So I can say that because I think Andrew mentioned the Belt and Road, which is a national initiative, the new forms of global trade. I also mention this because obviously Germany has a very particular, I think, responsibility and role on the engineering side for looking at how the world of the Internet of Things and the new economics that will come out of that will use some of these digital currencies. So just to give you some idea of scope, I mean, when we talk about, you know, cash and coins or M0, narrow money, we're talking only about 8% of the total money supply. So nearly all of the existing money that we currently talk about is already digital. So what I think we're missing here is the fact that it's digital and can flow over a network misses the point that these kinds of monies are also programmable. In other words, they can be designed in a way to basically make decisions based on some predetermined algorithm. So Andrew's point about clearly differentiating between CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, which could be viewed as a digital M0, digitization of the narrow money, is less exciting to me than technologies such as Bitcoin and also the cryptocurrency space, where the use of cryptography enables a different kind of transaction, which on the one hand is public and transparent, so everyone can see, but is also potentially very private. So with that, what I want to do is I want to take a stop here and saying, I think where we are, you know, there are 180 different currencies as represented by sovereigns that I think are recognized by the United Nations. Looking this evening, I think there are 5,500 different cryptocurrencies. So something is happening right now. And even Mark Carney, who was the former governor of the Bank of England last October in 2019, started talking about the challenges to, in some sense, the existing US dollar hegemony in terms of global trade, indicating at his Jackson Hole speech that, you know, we maybe need sort of a multipolar world, or we are actually already moving into a multipolar world, given that globalization seems to be going in a different direction. So even he mentioned this notion of synthetic hegemonic currencies. So it's ironic this evening that we're also being streamed over Facebook, because in some sense, we have, in some sense, Facebook's Libra project, which began in the middle of last year, to thank for it. Because when you're talking about a technological platform with 2.6 billion active monthly users, that's more than the population of China at 1.3, more than the population of India at another 1.3 billion, you know, more than combined. We're looking at a network which is not the size of an individual country, it's bigger than that. We're not even looking at a size of a network that has a population larger than the continent. We're looking at something different. And so if you look at the legacy of the Facebook Libra discussions, I think it's really early days to surface all the really important social issues. And today's discussion is important because I think society does need to participate in the new financial architecture which their children and others will be born into. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Pindar. Andrew, were you finished with your bit, or was there anything you wanted to add from your?
I'm good. I think we've got you got a couple of questions for us. You know,
yeah.
but I mean, yeah, because I mean, I definitely, I probably tend to focus more on the, you know, concerns about what the threats are from this. You know, whereas I know he's got an even bigger picture view of things, and like you said, you know, when it comes to IoT and the new future economy of machines talking to machines investing in machines, you know, it's pretty amazing. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also why it's really great that we have the two of you joining us tonight, because we have the different viewpoints. We have the narrow view, we have your specialist view. So I think that's really excellent. And I want to first start off also by thanking you for this short presentation, also for the different points that you have both highlighted. For explaining to us once again why this new currency is not a cryptocurrency, even though a lot of discussion before has been about that. Yeah. I think you called it the exact opposite of it, and I think it was also really interesting how you highlighted the very central, I mean literally central role that the PBOC is going to play in this. And also for illustrating the high degree of the digitalization of payments in China with this story about your wife. I think that's. I mean, I live in Germany, so Germans really like the paper money, and the idea of somebody not accepting my coins or my bills is really strange to me.
Yeah.
So let's maybe just start. Just one more comment for our audience. You're of course very welcome to already start typing your questions in the Q&A section and also in the chat while we are having the panel discussion here. So no need to sort of sit on your thoughts, just get them out. And then once we start with the Q&A section, I'll just pick from those.
Okay.
But I'll start with my questions first, because that's my privilege as a moderator, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple of really interesting things there, and one thing that is also quite central in your paper is the question of whether or not this Chinese digital currency is actually going to help with the internationalization of the renminbi. That's I think also one of the at least rumored goals that was, you know, that led to these plans. And do you think it will work? And if not, why would it? I mean, will it help?
Yeah, I mean,
not help.
Yeah, the Americans get a lot of benefits to being the world's global currency. You know, like what Pindar was talking about, they're able to weaponize. You know, they're able to weaponize their money, and of course get the benefits of seigniorage. And you know, China would like to get some of those benefits. They would like to come. You know, the Americans can put sanctions on countries. You know, Pindar mentioned Venezuela, but they'll slap. You know, Americans will slap sanctions on anybody they want, you know, whether it's the Iranians, and then they'll tell the rest of the world essentially they have to go along, they have to play ball. And China and a lot of other countries would probably prefer to not have that situation exist, where the Americans kind of hold that huge amount of power over them. And so, you know, the idea is that if they could internationalize the renminbi, if the renminbi was more common, and you know, wasn't always the US dollar that was the global currency, and if it wasn't always American influence financial structures, then they could do more, right? They could not have to worry about the Americans impinging on their ability to project power internationally through finance. But the Chinese have been trying to get the renminbi out there for a while, and you know, we talk about, you know, as Pindar was talking about, you have your M0, M1, M2 money, which is the money that normal people deal with, right? It is the money that you get in your wallet. It is the money that you have to buy a car. It's the money you have to take a mortgage, right? But they talk about the higher levels of money supply, and this is money that's going between banks. This is money that's going between major financial institutions or from central banks to banks. And this is when you get into the you know, much bigger numbers. And China has the reason they've struggled to get more internationalization of the RMB is because they will not let that go. They will not let that money go out in the world. And in particular, they're averse to having other people hold their debt, which is something that would really put a lot of renminbi into the world. So they've struggled to internationalize the renminbi generally. Now, could this help them do that if they start asking people around the world to take this as money? So for example, if they get China on this digital currency, and if everybody in China is using this currency, those Chinese, for example, tourists, which, you know, up until this year, were becoming a major economic force. And so you would have, you know, Hermes in Paris, right, or Versace in Rome. They would be taking WeChat Pay. They would be taking Chinese electronic payment. You go down to Australia, you go to Canada, and, you know, all over Europe, and they would be taking money paid for in digital renminbi. Now, this is not the digital currency yet, but if people want to get the Chinese money, could they start the spread of this by insisting that if you want our money, you take our digital currency? And there's the idea if you could do this, but I think the real, you know, and this is how it would start to spread. But again, this is still very much at the level of M1, M2 money supply, which is, as Pindar indicated, that's not the big prize. That's not, you know, really putting your currency on something approaching par with the euro or the US dollar, but it's a start. And I think, you know, I think they're going to have a problem with that, because when people understand how much control the PBOC has, how much visibility they have, they're going to have a lot of concerns about that money flowing into their systems. You know, whether, as I said, whether it's coming on the back of tourists, if Chinese suppliers to manufacturers across smaller countries in Asia, if they're saying, oh, now you have to pay me with this digital currency, that could push people to say, wow, if I want to keep paying my Chinese supplier, now I have to figure out where to get this currency. And you can see, you know, them going out and having to buy it so they can then pay for things, or vice versa. If you're a Cambodian border town with a casino, you know, and all your clients are coming across the border from China, and they're like, yeah, you're either taking my digital currency or nothing. I'll take your digital currency, but I will want to turn it into another currency as fast as I can, which again inhibits the flow of it. So, I mean, you could see it flowing into some places faster than other, but knowing the People's Bank of China can see it and take it makes it very high risk. You'd want to get rid of it as soon as possible. And I think that would inhibit the flow of that. I mean, if I had a client come to me in Hong Kong and say, I want to pay you in digital currency, I'm like, really? I mean, do I want to take that risk? Do I want to have the PBOC, you know, knowing what I'm up to all the time? And be like, I don't think so. So, I mean, people will take it if they have to. So.
Well, let me jump in here, because you know, I guess I'm here as always the devil's advocate. So you know, it's all sort of interesting to have that perspective. But how is what you just said is different from, for example, the credit card companies that exist today? They have visibility into your financial transactions. I mean, you mentioned Alipay and WeChat Pay, right? They dominate in China, but outside of China, you have Apple Pay and Google Pay. And so I think the more fundamental issues now is that regardless of whether or not you think one side, or the east side or the west side, from a privacy perspective, these both kinds of payment networks, they're equivalent, which is that, you know, your transactions, it's kind of like, you know, if you imagine all your notes that you use had your home address printed on it. Yeah. The kind of way I visualize it. You know, if we're moving into that world, or we actually may already be here, there's something actually more fundamental going on, irrespective of the fact that it's China or the US, which I think is quite topical right now because of the technology trends. But I think there's a more fundamental discussion. So there's something going on here with these networks that I think there needs to be a broader kind of discussion. Now, who has visibility into what? We talk about privacy. I mean, my understanding is the DCEP, this digital currency electronic payment, is actually private between transactions between me and you. In other words, you can't see that it's necessarily all my personal details, and I can't see yours. However, at a different level, perhaps at the central banking level that you mentioned, there may be, and there may be good reasons for that, for example, for regulation. At the same time, when you have all this value sloshing around at the speed of light globally, right, this velocity of funds, you know, traditional regulatory models of which Hong Kong enjoys, regulation didn't stop Bernie Madoff. Regulation didn't stop the global financial crisis. One has to ask, you know, where is the regulation going to be? Is it actually going to be inside the technology, inside the code, or is it going to be traditional views outside? I still think we have an open discussion here. And that's why I like to talk about what I call the burden of banking. I think there is regulatory reasons for what we call safety and soundness. We need to make sure that these financial systems are stable because, again, we store our value on it. But it's not clear to me we have that. It's not clear that taking friction out of all these payments so that it's convenient might enable, when we have bots attacking each other and spending money, new kinds of risks emerging. And I still think it's very early days. So all points taken. I think your paper is great. I think it's probably one of the best, to be honest, papers on the Chinese market, on what's happening in one form in English. It's very I would say provocative, which I think is good.
Yep.
I don't think you've broken any laws of writing it, not yet anyway.
Not yet.
Maybe us, yeah. So, but at the same time, it's really important that we have this discussion now. And again, I'm very pleased that the Friedrich Neumann Foundation has sponsored your work and has brought us together this evening.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, we're also very happy that you think that it's such an excellent paper, because that's also our view. So also for all of our participants, if you were wondering what this paper is that we're all talking about, if you go to freiheit.org and then you click on publications, it's in German, but if you Google translate it, you can still find your way. And I think it's the second one at the moment. And then you can download it. It's even though our web page is in German, it's available in English, and we can also just put the link in the chat here so you can access it. But yeah, I think you touched on a really interesting point just there, and I just wanted to clarify. You said that basically this new currency wouldn't give more insight than using a credit card. Is that really all there is, or if I understood Andrew correctly, the insight that also a bank can get is much bigger? Maybe I should also contextualize. I mean, I'm currently sitting in my office in Berlin, in Europe, where we are very focused. We like our privacy and we have GDPR. So this idea of basically being transparent when it comes to my financial data, especially, I mean, now it's just would just be about this amount of money that I have in this currency. But yeah, maybe you could clarify.
Well,
is it
yeah. So I think
just as a credit card, or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So to be fair, I mean, the individual pockets of information, be it the credit card companies, of which there are a handful, your bank. I mean, these are aggregating your data. And fortunately, in Europe, you have the GDPR, and as a data subject, you have certain rights. But arguably, your behavior doesn't change that much, right? We call this the patterns of life. And although some of the Shoshana Zuboff wrote about surveillance capitalism, I think in her famous book, that's just tremendous amount of what I would say power or perhaps unintended consequences. And we know this, and I think Germany has experienced no less 3 times what might happen when you lose your societal trust system. Right, you went from the Mark, the Reichsmark, the Rentenmark, the Deutschmark, and now the euro. And so anytime you have a change in the societal technology in finance, huge consequences. What I'm saying right now is that the GDPR as it applies to finance, and specifically your identity, then there is an opportunity there for those in Europe who have these laws to think a little bit harder about what that actually means. Why? Because we know on the web there have been unintended consequences from all the browser surveillance, for example. But you can use another browser and you can reset your cookies. Right now, your financial identity maps to you as a person. What if, for example, Germany creates a financial avatar when you're under 18? And that you can dispose of that when you're an adult, for example. I mean, these are kinds of, I think, societal discussions. Who should have visibility into what and to what degree? I would argue now that these digital networks, these digital platforms have a kind of insight. They know us better than we know ourselves, irrespective of whether or not they are sort of east or west. I think the consequences are unknown. And I think we need to raise the ethical questions of where are the limits. And I think that discussion needs to begin now.
Maybe sort of, maybe you just answer first and then I have sort of a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because I tend to come from a background where I worry more about central governments having that degree of visibility into our lives. I don't worry much if a credit card company can see a little bit of this and a bank can see a little bit of that. But I would worry if I knew that one entity that was also connected to the military and everybody else could see everything. And not only that, could reach out and take it. I mean, at the same time, and there's because if for whatever reason they decided they weren't happy with me, and so I tend to have that a little bit of a higher level of concern about what kind of power that gives. And then I guess to think about China, a couple of other things about this is that the rest of the world is so far behind. I mean, there's no way like the U.S. banking system is that there's nobody I think that has anything even close to this. And if it kind of gets turned loose in the world, once it starts spreading around the world, I think generally financial regulators and financial actors around the world are going to be really poorly positioned to understand it. I mean, when major banks are still trying to figure out how to get off servers run on C+ language, it's really when they think cloud computing is a big deal. I mean, it seems like they're not keeping up with what this could possibly mean. And I recognize what Pindar is saying, that it does present a huge amount of opportunity. But I think people don't recognize how far ahead China is on a lot of these technologies.
But Andrew, it's actually, I mean, I think the rest of the world talks about fintech, right? How do we use technology to make more efficient the existing financial system, right? Take friction out of it, make it better, faster, cheaper, more chocolatey. And as you know, China's about tech fin. It's about, you have a technology, you can simulate a lot of financial services. You may or may not need the money. And Alibaba through Alipay and Tencent through Tencent Pay or WeChat, sorry, which is in Shenzhen, are good examples. They're not banks, although one of them has a banking license. So the burden of banking, the banking function is necessary, but it may not necessarily be provided by in the future by traditional banks. It could be non-banking entities. I would say that the burden of banking is that also the bank, I'm very sympathetic to the banks. I mean, they have a lot of legacy infrastructure and they have a lot of regulation that if they don't obey, they go to jail, right? It's not a fine. Hong Kong is in that position. But at the same time, how do you evolve to a world where you've got hundreds of millions of wallets and you have no branches, right? That's a different financial architecture. And that's still with humans. When we're talking about 50 billion devices active on 5G networks, exchanging value, like through your, people sort of may misunderstand that, Huawei and others who are the sort of poster boy of in discussion of tech. I mean, they're just selling boxes and selling platforms, which they've actually offered to open up to everyone. Is the real economic value going to be building these networks? I would argue not. It's going to be the data. And what data is that? It's going to be financial data. It may actually be money in terms of a different form. So I think at the same time, I'm from Hong Kong, right? So we believe in the free market. So I think it's not as controversial by saying that if people perceive there's a good legitimate reason for using DCEP, fine. Let the market win and let someone come and displace it. But coming from the view of if others people can invent something better, as I said, there's 5,500 other cryptocurrencies, each with their own little tweak. So something is going on right now, and I'm not quite sure what. I personally am. I look at the Bitcoin technology. It hasn't died, right? It's been pronounced dead, 300 times. But at $180 billion US market cap from a central banking perspective, that's a rounding error on a rounding error. And if you want to copy the code, go ahead.
Okay, so just a quick sort of follow-up question from myself that will hopefully lead us also to the other really interesting topics that we have. You mentioned, because I mean, I work for the Liberal Foundation, so we're not inherently against any new technologies, and what you said about potentially making the banking industry, making financial transactions more efficient. I mean, that sounds promising. That sounds like a good idea in principle, but I also, of course, have this concern about privacy, as you might have noticed. So you mentioned before the idea of maybe there could be something like a financial avatar. You mentioned that as an idea for people who are underage and they could then dispose of it. And I was just wondering, do you think, is there a possibility, or could there in the future be a possibility of having a way to use maybe this digital currency or others, while at the same time sort of, I mean, protecting your privacy a little bit better? The example that came to my mind was the Tor browser, which actually gives you a lot more anonymity when surfing in the web. And you mentioned that you can just use a different browser if you don't like the one that you're using for XYZ reasons. So is that a possibility, or is the currency constructed in a way that it makes it impossible? Yeah. Who wants to go first? Yeah, Pindar, please.
Andrew, why don't you jump in first?
I'll get in on this one first. So I mean, so you asked, like, for this particular digital currency, and then there's other digital currencies. I mean, the guiding philosophy behind the central authorities in China is control. I mean, they want to make sure they want to have a handle on everything, and so everything's connected. So I don't think this will be built in such a way. They're not concerned about the privacy of the user. They're concerned about their ability to see and to control. I think other digital currencies, other national digital currencies might have the potential to work differently. And I mean, and I love what Pindar said about, in the free market, people can choose their currencies. If there's a free market of currencies, people can choose which ones they want to work with and which ones they don't. And so I think in those cases, yes, people could choose and protect themselves in that way. So, I could look at a certain currency and say, okay, I have trust, trust that currency is built in such a way and it is used in such a way that it protects my privacy. Whereas they might look at another one and say, no, that one doesn't. And then they can decide how much they care about privacy versus having the money to spend on other things and make their decisions from there. But, especially when the whole crypto thing took off and a lot of young people, I mean, it was really attractive for young people, but every 20, 21, 22-year-old who was crypto trading, they kept their money in 10 to 15 different wallets. The way they protected themselves was by keeping it in many different places. So that was another way to protect themselves, not too many eggs in one basket. People in normal situations, they're like, most people are like, well, here's the bank I go to. And I think that if the bank goes bust, there's some kind of deposit protection. So I guess that's fine. Whereas if you told the 21-year-old crypto trader to do that, it'd be like, put all my money in one place. Are you crazy? So they find other ways to protect themselves.
Jumping in here, I think, the reason why I focus on the youth is because I think they come from a very different space. I mean, they're the digital natives. And so when I was born, I was born into an economy which has a default currency. The youth now, they can choose their economy. Let me say that again. They can choose which economy they participate in because of the network and the associated so-called currency used by that network. That's why there are 5,500 other sort of cryptocurrencies. This is a different world. But the point here, though, is I think a lot of the existing regulation focuses on notions of legal tender, of legal accountability, and using the force of law. And what we know from the last 20 odd years of the internet is that laws have borders. And so when we're talking about access to financial networks, be it SWIFT, be it what have you, when you lose access to that network, it can be actually pretty devastating. But at the same time, there could be plenty of other networks out there. As long as there's a choice, have at it. I mean, that's the thing. If there's only one network and then access is denied, then your world just, your financial world just collapses.
Actually, I'll pick up on that just because I see there's a question from the chat groups on the side there, and one of them is how do you view the U.S. response to the DCEP by trying to strengthen SWIFT, which is kind of related to what we're talking about right now. And I remember, about 2 years ago, when we were running big blockchain conferences, and everybody, one of our most popular speakers with the media was Swift, not because they were doing something, but because they were like, this crypto Ripple was kind of the hot one for, helping to facilitate forex transactions across borders. Everyone's like, Swift is going down. It's going to disappear. It's the end of Swift. So far not yet, but it doesn't mean that their business can't be eroded. Another thing that's impacting on, Swift and the Bank of International Settlements is that China and Russia have recently signed a three-way pact with India to create a system of settlement that is outside of the American-dominated system. Because the Russians and the Chinese, obviously, they've got their own clearing systems, and now they've joined those up. India doesn't have one, but it's going to participate in theirs, and it is directly aimed at trying to get out from underneath the American dominance of the global financial system. So I mean, that's these. I
mean, if you remember, sort of, Andrew, in 2014, when we had sort of the Russian military intervention in the Ukraine. You had effectively, the use of SWIFT as an M16, right? The US removed Russia from SWIFT. And obviously, at the end of the 2014 period, you had the Russian ruble crisis. So you're looking at sort of national security and stability issues when, SWIFT is 1973, right? The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. It has, the famous MT400 device for payment messaging system. But that's quite there, and yes, they're going to innovate. But I would argue a lot of the discussions surrounding the digital dollar as a response to, again, DCEP or digital RMB is probably something that deserves more attention.
Yeah, if they can pull it together, yeah.
Sure. I mean, it's a big if, but I think the digital dollar was first. Michael Casey, in his first book on the age of cryptocurrencies, I think he was one of the first people to identify Citibank in like 30 years ago, looking at digital dollar. And don't forget, the monies that we talk about now, they're nearly all digital anyway. It's a question that only involves banks as being participants of the network. And we have non-bank entities, non-bank financial entities, and many other different kind of technology players, Google, Alibaba, Amazon, all the others that in fact have the engineering skill to be able to pull something off like a new cryptocurrency.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So we have one question also from a participant. I'm trying to add him as a discussant, so he can ask his question himself. If it works, then he can. Hold on. He has to rejoin. Okay. I think that did not quite work. That's fine. I can read out his question. It was directed to Pindar. Oh, there he is. Mr. von Karnap?
Yes, hello.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Please
much.
Go ahead, ask your question to Pindar.
Right, yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much for the paper as well. My question was, I guess, more addressed to Mr. Wong, which is about the national cryptography law that was basically adopted last, I think, November or October. And it's basically in the tradition of a long-standing movement of moving Chinese encryption standards away from international standards, such as the advanced encryption standard, more towards a Chinese based model of encryption. And I think the general question, because I'm not so much in the technology of it, is, do you think it already holds up to international encryption standards, which have developed over 20, 30 years, and I think are really, I think, difficult, or at least viewed within the community, difficult to really compete with. And if you want to set up a digital currency based on something like a domestic national Chinese encryption standard, that has to, I think, hold up to very, very high standard. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Sure. So just to declare, I'm not a cryptographer. I'm sort of financially numerate, but cryptographers are a very different kind of mind. I think the long and short of it is that every nation state actor will only believe its own crypto. And whilst there are a lot of international standards, for example, the US set of standards, we also know from the Snowden papers that there may be some magic numbers in it. So I think the international community, the international cryptographic community, is the one who is the most qualified to ask. At the same time, every country most likely, I think Germany was you know, I think Merkel's mobile phone had some interesting features in it that she wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
I think this whole notion of cryptography, typically you don't attack the cryptography, you attack the implementation of the cryptography. In other words, you don't attack the mathematics. And I think as long as the mathematics is public, I would feel that there would be more trust in the algorithms. At the same time, I think what we're seeing, you know, the question I get asked all the time is sort of, you know, quantum computers and whether or not that would break some of the hashing algorithms and whether or not they're quantum resistant. Short answer is I don't know. And I think it's also missing the point because, you know, who are you trusting? And in some sense, cryptography is in fact the blackest of black boxes. If you're not a mathematician, if you're not a cryptographer specifically, you're just actually going to have blind faith that this crypto works. And I would argue that's even worse than what we've got right now, because that's sort of, you know, you can say there's a person who's accountable. There are laws I can read and understand for myself. So this is an example of where you're not actually, you know, these technologies, these cryptocurrencies are not trustless at all. It's just pushed down to a very different level, and at the level where effectively it looks like magic. So why should society need to trust it is basically, I think, the question you're asking, and it shouldn't. The more people who have visibility into it, the more people have visibility into the code base to see if it's implemented. There are a whole host of areas that could be so-called points of attack. And it's still early days. So we've seen that in terms of Bitcoin. So again, this could be the best time to have this kind of discussion, because, you know, blind faith in anything is probably not good. And cryptography, as you know, when cryptography breaks, it breaks miserably. And so I think the most interesting systems that I'm aware is where you can, in some sense, evolve the cryptography. And therefore, when there is a cryptographic break, and I think there will be, technology and mathematical techniques improve, then you can evolve out instead of locking yourself in.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, thank you. I think you said that you were not a cryptographer, and for that, I think your answer was quite extensive. And I think it's always good to, you know, to keep in mind that, well, first of all, anything that humans make, they can also, I mean, they encode, they can also crack. And it's always good to keep in mind that blind trust is not such a good idea in general. we have a bright mind, and I think, you know, there's the liberal motto, right? You should dare to think for yourself. I think also applies here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have another question on my list that I was sort of burning for you to answer. We're going to overrun a little bit. If that's okay with you. We'll keep it short. So you mentioned when we were discussing about privacy before, and one of the arguments also from Andrew's side was that actually that there's going to be a lot of pressure associated with this currency. It's not that you have a lot of potential vendors and you can choose, oh, I'm going to take this one, or I'm going to take that one. And the example that you used, I think, was the Cambodian casino border town that will just basically have no other choice than to accept it. So I think then that also just not just the casino border towns, but also, I mean, the whole economies will feel a lot of pressure to accept this currency, and that will also, I think, have quite in-depth changes for that. What would that mean for them? I mean, you see a potential that, you know, the traditional paper money, the coins and the bills that we in Germany love so much, that they could potentially fall out of use in those countries, or you think the impact is not going to be that big, or?
You're talking about the smaller countries like your Laos and Cambodia, and
I was talking about about smaller countries like Laos and Cambodia, who are just very dependent on trade. And then maybe interestingly, the follow-up question, so to say, would be other countries who are very who might, for political reasons, opt to use that one. I'm thinking about maybe the Philippines, if Mr. Duterte continues to align himself with Beijing.
Yeah, I had an interesting discussion with somebody who's a big player in the payment space, digital payment space in the Philippines, and I had some question about this, and we were talking about this, and I said, would you implement? He goes, yeah, of course. He goes, it's no big deal. I just implement it and bring it. I says, would you worry, about you know, maybe being complicit in turning the Philippines into a bit of a client state of China. And he's like, what do you mean turn it into? We already are. And I thought that was pretty shocking to hear from a Filipino, quite extreme. Maybe he was being a little flippant, right? Maybe he was just having me on to get a reaction, but it was like, but I mean, I don't think the Philippines so much, but I mean, like a Cambodia or Laos, you know, the way it would come in, I think, number one, tourism. It's like, listen, you want the tourist money. And I mean, if I'm running a restaurant, you know, to me, am I really thinking about these issues of privacy and whether or not the PBOC can see into my, I don't care really, you know, so tourism's kind of a front line, but then you have the level of trade where you've got small time manufacturers they're either buying supplies from China so they can manufacture themselves, or they're just buying finished goods from China, or they're selling something into China, and where there's pressure on them to take it. And, you know, on the surface, it won't look that different from just getting a digital payment at this point, you know, just be, you know, money moved around. So they might be like, okay, fine with that. And then if there's government to government transactions, or if China's investing in infrastructure, they may then at that level say, oh wait, now you're going to take our digital currency. At which point these countries are like, okay, fine. I mean, unless they have a mechanism for, you know, taking it, and if there's a liquid market where they could turn it into US dollars right away, I don't see them having any capacity to push back. Now, if it's a Cambodia or Laos, they're going to do what China tells them. If it's a Vietnam, I think it's a very different story. Because politically they're much more independent minded, but you know, I think it will be limited. I mean, you might be able to get some Australian, you know, companies in the tourist industry to take some of the digital renminbi because it's not such a big deal. But I couldn't see China putting that kind of pressure on the Australian government, you know, on higher level Australian bodies with the government or big Australian companies to take that kind of money. But a small country, yeah, I don't know, Pindar, what do you think?
This is beyond my pay grade. All I would say is, you know, let the market decide. Going back to that, but also I would point that people come up, you know, people are very ingenious, you know, so why not reinvent the physical note and the physical coin that you could actually pass digital value, but it's physical and you can pass it just like a note. So the example from the Bitcoin world is OpenDime, where you can actually try, so like a USB stick, and you can pass it around and it's like a coin, it's like a cash. And so I still think we're very early days. I don't think it's anything is set in stone, but I think there needs to be a discussion on, again, what, you know, to what degree. And the issue that I have with nearly all the papers that are out there in the subject is that they look at all of this from monetary policy, and I'm a kind of guilty for, you know, M0, M16, when really I think the big killer app for governments when we have all the economies being stressed by COVID-19 is in fact fiscal policy, tax. You know, what happens if governments who are going to be very stretched for securing resources, if they take more than so-called the coin of the realm, right? Maybe they take Bitcoin. I mean, you know, quite cheekily, I said, well, for, you know, I accept Bitcoin. If you don't, well, then, you know, people can agree what currency they accept. And I think where things will get very interesting is when forward-leading governments open their tax regimes to say, yes, we accept this menu of network-aware currencies, and then see what happens. So I don't actually think it's from the, you know, right now in terms of the Bitcoin network with Lightning, you know, we can stream value like we can stream music. So just think about that world where I can stream tax revenues to you. It sounds like science fiction, but again, that's where the innovation is happening. So even though we have CBDCs, which I view as being largely incremental, linear incremental improvements on the existing system, which are already digital, you have completely different worlds where people are reimagining money. I think look at the CoinDesk Excellence series by Michael Casey and others. And you know, for disclosure purposes, I'm on their advisory board. You know, look at those series because it looks fanciful, but there are people who are actually building these systems now. And so it's good to surface all the problems, all the warts now, so that good engineers and thoughtful policymakers can say, we as a society, we want this for these reasons, and we're going to build it.
Yeah. Okay. So
yeah, that's exciting stuff. That's the super cool stuff.
Yeah, OpenDime, it's there. You know, there's a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of not having to give up
Look at
coins
I
and
would actually,
papers.
I could bring you some great cards that was developed in Russia. they like their currency too. So the question is, what's the balance, right? It's not because if you, even I exchange it to you and we're on a video camera in some dark alley in shadow banking world, then there's no privacy there. So it's a question of balance, and the question, where is that balance struck? And my concern right now, and I think the reason why China is so far ahead, is because they're largely technocrats. They're engineers who bubbled up into the positions of power. They built China up through hard work, and so although there are people who like to look at the edge worst case scenarios, I think China is pretty much aware that if it is to be broad acceptance, they are the first ones to say, let the market decide. And the question is, what is that? So let's have a dialogue.
Let's have a dialogue. That's I think that's an excellent also closing remark from your side. Let's have a dialogue. That's something that we have tried to do here with the webinar, with having the questions. Thank you everybody for participating, for the panel discussion. It was lovely to have you all there. And I think I'm going to give over to Yin for the final wrap up and goodbye. So thank you from my side.
Yeah, thank you guys for this fruitful discussion. And thank you, Anna, for the moderation. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's for many people also a very new topic. Like me, it is a very quite technical, but at the same time very interesting. And also, it's going to happen soon, right? The digital yuan is going to launch soon, and I think everybody, especially people in Hong Kong, they should also be aware of what is exactly this and what is the implication of this, and what and what is the new trend in the world as well. Because as we know that not just China is doing this, like 70% of the central banks in the world are doing research on. So let's see what is going to happen in the next few years in this finance world. And thank you for the participants as well. And one remark, the paper from Andrew, I'm going to share again on the chat. Oh, I clicked wrong, sorry. So I'm going to share the link, download link for the Andrew works paper. If you're interested in this, you can just click on the link and download it. Otherwise, I wish you guys good evening and good afternoon and good morning as well.
All right. Hey, thanks for having us. Dankeschön.
Ja. Bitteschön. Vielen Dank. Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you so much. Auf Wiedersehen. See you online.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.